So I'm Deron Streitenberger. I'm part of the team at the FHLBank of Indianapolis. A lot of you may not know much about us. We were created to support home ownership in the United States. There's 11 of us. We each have a district. We're part of the same government-sponsored enterprise system that contains Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Most of you have probably heard of Fannie and Freddie. But we're particularly unique because our shareholders are exclusively banks, credit unions, and insurance companies that are domiciled in our district, and our district is Indiana and Michigan. So here's what that means to you very specifically, is that my role and what I'm speaking to you about today, it's really about community growth and advancement through public-private partnerships, and it's from the viewpoint of people who are our shareholders and our customers. Those are the people that are in this room sitting next to you. They own and operate and work at financial services firms and insurance companies. As I transition into my presentation, I would ask you to think of one thing. I wrote down a lot of the words that Joe used: employment, jobs, principal and interest, income, investments, debt and payments. Does it sound like housing or sound like business? Sounds like business, right? Not like housing. This intersection between housing and business is critical. And it's a big piece of really trying to understand how a community-led and community-planned effort to develop public and private partnerships has real value. Another thing you're going to hear in my presentation, and I'm going to tell you this is about balance, is you're going to hear me talk about the other side of multifamily housing and rental housing. The stuff that Joe said is accurate. It's data-driven. And the goals are the same. He and I have talked a lot about this. We're not in any disagreement. But it is about balance, and it is about understanding how to use rental housing and how to use home ownership and how to manage affordability, but also how to make sure that you're developing median incomes, median home values, and those above that mark too. It's about balance. And so hopefully at the end of this presentation, as you look through what I'm going to talk to you about, I have a few goals, three in fact. First, establish why public-private partnerships are relevant. Second, recognize the challenges that are in place right now. Set the stage not just locally, but also nationally for some of the challenges we have and why public-private partnerships play a role. And third, really motivate you to take a clear look at public-private partnerships as you move forward. So let's kind of get common language right out of the gate, right? Public-private partnerships are really pretty common. If you've ever been on a toll road or sat in a large sports stadium, maybe you've, gone to a parking garage or a parking lot, you've used a public-private partnership and your community's benefited. Some of these things, social impact bonds and pay for success, they get kind of hyped in the media a little bit, but let's be honest, it's paying for performance. And there's nothing bad about paying for performance. Back to this idea that there's a business component to this. Social impact bonds are in California, Missouri, Texas, Tennessee, Massachusetts, and Indiana. They're all over the place. So don't get, set off by kind of a slant on it. It's pay for performance, and it's a way to bring communities and the public sector and the private sector together to get the goals that we share. And lastly, just housing. Housing, HUD is really pretty much nothing but the kind of nation's largest public-private partnership. They can be controversial, so I admit that and acknowledge it. No one likes to lose control. People hate to be monitored and tracked. Everybody wants to complain that somebody else in a deal is getting a better deal than them. These are just kind of human nature issues, and they plague, everything we do, including business. But the key point of the thing I really want you to remember is that really on scale, public-private partnerships are irreplaceable. If you look at, and you're right now in the throes of a massive transportation initiative yourselves, and you look at kind of what the pay-up is for a community on a typical transportation project, it's $500 million right now. There aren't a lot of communities that have $500 million laying around to invest in something. If you think about Indiana specifically, right, and the Indiana toll road, Great story of all the things I'm talking about, ups and downs, right? Mitch Daniels, sells it to a private entity, raises, $3.8 billion. Well, the entity the toll road stops being maintained, the entity becomes insolvent. Governor Mike Pence then wants to sell it again. No one agrees with that, but he does it anyway, raises the value of it back to $5.7 billion. And if you look at the money being allocated to the counties the toll road runs through today, they're getting about twice what they would have gotten without that monetization of that toll road. Texas, it's just kind of a cheap ploy on my part to say, no one would think Texas would want to do all this kind of public interference in the private sector. But you know what? Tolls, bridges, other venues in Texas, $8 billion in 2014. So everybody's doing this. And this asset monetization strategy got Detroit out of a horrible, horrible situation where within about a year, they were able to raise about $1.5 billion to become solvent. So that's the public side picking up that benefit and getting solvent and now on a road to recovery. I have to spend time in Detroit as part of my responsibilities. We have a hub there. We have staff there. And I can tell you, you can't cross the street without somebody building something. It's just enormous growth. And they wouldn't be on that path without that public-private partnership. There's low-income housing tax credits. This is something you have to deal with on the business side of this. Make it really simple. The government's selling a tax break, and they sell it to people who want to build affordable housing, and then the people who are building the affordable housing sell it to people who don't get tax breaks. And then they have that money to close gaps and cracks in their capital stacks to build affordable housing. And then there's the Federal Home Loan Bank of Indianapolis. We award about $10 to $12 million annually in a variety of programs. So if you think about scale here, we're talking about $30 million in affordable housing dollars. And so we still have to work together to make sure that all the dollars go the right places, whether it's ownership or rental, multifamily, single family. But we can't lose track of the fact we need the scale and we need the money. So that's kind of the educational piece of this. I want to transition to talking a little bit about the situation we face, and these are some headlines that have been out there recently. And I think it's really good to repeat this stuff. There's the tell them and tell them and tell them again. And we have to do this not only for ourselves, but with each other and remind ourselves about what we're really working on here. And we're talking about an environment that's just had absolutely record price increases in housing. So I don't know if any of you, I look a lot, we buy mortgages as part of our business from our members. And so I'm obviously very sensitive to the value of housing, not just in terms of providing affordable housing, but in terms of building a balance sheet that earns money to pay dividends to our shareholders. So I think about this from every 360 degrees, every perspective. And I think if I remember the data I looked at before coming down here, Martinsville, the city, had now jumped well up above $210,000 in a median income house just recently. I mean, the data I'm going to show you later, that is, like a 30+% increase in a little over a year. I don't know how many people in the room are making 30% more than they were a year ago, but even with the pressure we have on wages, I think that's probably still accelerating much faster than people's wages are accelerating. The other thing is we have a demand-supply mismatch right now. That's obvious, and that really has a huge impact on the prices. And there's a downturn here. This hasn't been an equal recovery for everyone and still isn't. Now, that's not politics, that's just data. That's just data. We have folks who aren't recovering at the same rate. And we can argue the politics of how they recover, but what we can't argue about is that there's a gap. And so that's kind of, what I think public-private partnerships can do for you. They shouldn't necessarily take away your decision-making and tell you how to do things. They do a little bit. That's kind of the price of being in a partnership, right, is you have to respect the other person's opinion. But if you lead and you plan, the public-private partnership can follow. Some other really important data points, particularly for those who aren't participating in the recovery the same way, right? They had a housing shortage. That 6.8 million, that was at the beginning of the pandemic. It's well over 7 million now. Residential and commercial renters, as well as homeowners, I don't think we understand that this isn't just about cash flowing, right? Back to business again, right? Yeah, they're cash flowing now. The government has stepped in, there's been some recovery, properties are cash flowing, but they're in arrears. And so when programs end, as Joe said, no one knows how to forecast what's going to happen when they need to become current. Because right now there are a lot of investors that are standing on assets that are cash flowing but not current. And this is a real issue in putting the public and the private partnerships together and making them work. We think affordable housing is government housing, and it's just not. It's not if it's single family ownership, and it's not if it's rental. Affordable housing is much different than that. Joe showed you some of those statistics. You have people in your community that is what they're making. And the question you have to ask yourself is not necessarily can you change the status quo, but can you get them more aid? Can you get them more help? And can you plan so that it best meets the needs of your community and for them? Some in rental, some transitioning to home ownership, some staying in home ownership, some staying in home ownership that's better than the home they have today through improvements. There's some help coming from Washington. It's on the horizon. But I mean, honestly, not that it's not there, but every day, right? The latest one is now violence, right? So now the administration is turning towards violence. There are a lot of other things getting in the way of completing the work they're doing to address housing. And so that's why it's good you all are here, because you have to take that responsibility on too. Some more data. Generally speaking, suburban and rural communities have been big winners. So you're where everybody wants to come and live. Some of the questions you need to make sure you're asking yourself along the way is, are you planning properly, right? Affordability and flexibility. So it's not just moving into an environment and buying a house at, $300,000 or $500,000. If that house isn't going to continue to increase, then the person's flexibility to sell the house and either move up or provide that, opportunity to the next person is greatly limited. So planning really addresses affordability and flexibility. Your demand curve is likely going to go down. There's a lot of good demographics that still speak to what the long-term cycles look like, but they are cycles. And so right now, I think everybody should expect that the demand is going to be affected by a combination of rates and supply. And lastly, you've got some other things to think about in terms of commercial real estate development and public services and utilities. Listen, I grew up in a small town. Everybody knows what it's like to have a new strip mall open and be so excited. And everybody knows what it looks like 10 or 15 years later when it's kind of run down a little bit and the businesses are a little bit different and now you're a little bit disappointed. This is natural, it's normal. But you have to plan for these things as a community and make sure you can continue to address them and revitalize them. So now let's kind of talk about how you really engage public-private partnerships. And listen, I'll be honest, I'm going to say it, everybody loves $300,000 to $500,000 single-family homes. That is like the gas in the engine. Right? Developers love it, local governments love it, builds a tax base. Those people have disposable income. So does that need to be part of your thinking? Absolutely, it needs to be part of your thinking. But you also have to think about your existing housing inventory. And this is where public-private partnerships are particularly valuable. They can help not only people get into homes through grants, but they can help people maintain their homes. They can help people modify and create accessibility in their homes when they age. This is an important part of society today, is keeping aging people in place in their homes. And so there are programs and there are monies out there and there are things you can do to form partnerships to not just create new value through new single-family homes and multifamily investments, but you can unlock the energy and power that's already there for your existing home ownership stock. Multifamily housing, and this is where I'm trying to create that balance, that circle with Joe's message, and he spoke to you a lot about this. I'm not arguing against it or trying to take it off the table. They all fit together. He said it at the end. It's about creating balance and planning and putting it all together. And I very much believe in that. You need to understand, though, that multifamily housing is a service for those who serve, right? This is where folks are able to get housing that creates workforce housing, it creates transitional housing, it creates a place for people to be and to stay as they save and grow and prepare themselves to become homeowners as well. And so I want you to also think, as I kind of close out those remarks, about the benefits of asset monetization and public-private partnerships on infrastructure. Particularly kind of as the new interstate system gets completed, keep an eye on that and make sure you're thinking about that and make sure your townships and your cities are kind of really keeping their heads clear and thinking a lot about that as well. And so really now I want to talk about, I wish I could pull the mic off the stand. I want to talk about opportunity and I want to show you some data. So there's a couple different ways of looking at things. Dan knows me really well. I've never met a glass that was anything other than half full. I'm not a half-empty thinker, and the reason why I'm not a half-empty thinker is because identifying strengths and opportunities is the key to progress. And that's what I want to talk to you about. I want to talk to you about strengths and opportunities. Right now, Morgan County gets thumbs up in two categories, poverty rate and median household income, but only on one of your sister counties. Only on one. Otherwise, you're behind everywhere else. But I don't see behind, I see opportunity. And there's a key reason why I see opportunity, because as I go through and show you some of this data, what you're going to see is that your median household income and your median property values aren't that far off, right? So as we say in my family, you've got good bones. That's really, really important because those are foundational statistics. What you're going to see on the other statistics is opportunity. And so let's kind of start and let's look at Hendricks. Hendricks is pretty well positioned in terms of having a lot of infrastructure opportunities geographically where they are. Also a 2 interstate county. But really what stands out here is not the gap on median household income and median property value. It's on population, age, and jobs. That's where the gap is. That's where the opportunity is. That's where you have opportunity. And if you move down to Monroe County, this is where you've got the lead, but I think we know kind of the nature of Monroe County and how it's so affected by the IU system kind of explains a little bit of that. But again, not so far off on the bones categories, but once again, real opportunity in terms of population, median age, and jobs. And if we keep going and we get to Johnson County, once again, same story. And so this is something where I kind of want to walk away from this and say, you have a real opportunity, right? Clearly you have fundamentals that are strong. You can statistically go and look and measure yourselves and say, if I can, address affordable housing from the perspective of both rental and single family home ownership, and I can reduce poverty, increase wealth, and provide jobs, I can grow population. That brings younger people to the community. It increases the number of jobs. And that's really back to where we started. That's the business that raises all the boats in the ocean. That's how you get everybody moving in the same direction. Public-private partnerships can help you with this. They can help you with planning. They can invest in you. They can do things to help you continue to maintain your existing infrastructure and housing. And I had said to someone that when my daughter was at IU and she's graduated now, I would always drive through here. I never went the interstate. I always drove through Martinsville. Always drove through Martinsville to get there its way. Always took. And there were times, particularly when the town square was being built and everything was being revitalized, I would always just drive through and follow up on the things I had been told and the things I was learning and the things I was involved with Mr. Moore. And I can tell you that I would continue to do that just to see. And I did it today. It was the first time I'd done it in a while, and I was able to do it because I remembered how to tie my shoes, put on a belt, and wear a shirt with buttons. First time it felt like in 18 months that I wasn't, kind of business up top and party down below wearing shorts and slippers everywhere. And so when you do that and you realize that it's still there and it's still vital and there's so many good bones there and so much still to do, this is something else I want to emphasize, which is throughout Morgan County, public-private partnerships can focus on this for you and help you with this. And then just lastly, take charge and lead on it. Because, the bad rap that public-private partnerships typically get from experience is when they're allowed to kind of really be the first seat at the table and lead and push the agenda, and you just don't need that. My business, despite being chartered, as a government-sponsored enterprise, the folks that manage me every day and the folks that own our business, they're sitting in this room. And so I have a very different focus than a lot of people would that have that heritage. And I can tell you that I think if you come out of here and as you break up into planning groups and you volunteer, keep bringing public-private partnerships back to the table, lead on that topic, ask tough questions, and there's folks here, in this audience today and throughout the state that will really work with you and partner with you. And so that concludes my remarks. Thanks so much for letting me be here.